Welcome to our continuing virtual voices focusing on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you for your questions and letters. We appreciate receiving them. Our speaker today is Dr. William Hardy, who is the president and director of the National Veterinary Laboratory, which he established in 1972. Dr. Hardy graduated from the University of Pennsylvania School of Veterinary Medicine and joined the staff at the Memorial Sloan-Kettering Cancer Center, where he remained for 24 years studying cancer viruses. He was then appointed professor of medicine at the Albert Einstein School of Medicine and was the director of the Center for Infectious Diseases at the Bronx Lebanon Hospital Center in Bronx. He was a consultant in the Infectious Disease Services at Memorial Sloan-Kettering and adjunct professor of oncology at the University of Pennsylvania School of Veterinary Medicine. Dr. Hardy has been studying feline and human retroviruses, the feline leukemia, sarcoma, and immunodeficiency viruses, and developed the first test for feline leukemia virus. He discovered that the feline leukemia virus is spread contagiously among cats, which was the first example that retroviruses could be transmitted contagiously in any animal. Dr. Hardy authored 255 scientific articles and presently is focused on zoonotic diseases, pandemics, climate change, and worldwide resource utilization. Over to you, Dr. Hardy.
Thank you, Dr. Jorbeck. It's very nice to be invited back to give this presentation, which is animals and COVID-19. We're obviously in the midst of a tremendous pandemic worldwide, not only for humans, but we now realize the animals related to humans are getting infected with this virus. And as of November 14th, the World Health Organization data shows that worldwide, there are 250 million cases, 5 million deaths, and 230,000 people who recovered. United States had 48 million cases so far, 784 deaths, which is 15% of the world death statistics, and 38 million recoveries. China has given no data for this study, and India and Brazil are second and third ranks in the occurrence of this disease. Add to this the many thousands of pet and wild animals that have now been infected from people, which is called a reverse zoonosis. Humans receive the virus from animals, and unfortunately, humans are giving back the virus to a varied plethora of animals worldwide. Back to the zoonotic aspect of this disease, any infectious disease, zoonotic disease is any pathogen that animals can naturally transmit to people. There are 200 types of zoonotic diseases. 60% of all human infectious diseases today originated from animals, and 75% of new emerging diseases will come from animals. SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes the COVID-19 pandemic, originated in Wuhan, China, where many people think it may have been a backwater type of town, but this is Wuhan, China, a beautiful metropolis full of tall buildings. They also have the wet market, as you can see here from the menu of what they sell. All these animals are used for consumption in China. And here's the market looking from the New York Times, all the carcasses of the animals being sold. And the pandemic began most likely from a horseshoe bat coronavirus, which is very, very similar to the present virus we have circulating in people. It went through another host, most likely a pangolin, but we're not sure of that, into a human being. And then from there, from one human being on, we have this pandemic. The virus that you've probably seen many pictures of this, the SARS-CoV-2 virus. It's a coronavirus, meaning it's a crown type virus. It has these projections looking like crowns, which carry a protein called the spike protein. This is the key to getting into cells of humans or animals. All coronaviruses have this structure. So we have the bat zoonosis into people, a reverse zoonosis, and these definitions keep varying, goes back into some animals. So we have a reverse zoonosis, which I'll talk about in many animals, of this virus going back into uninfected cats, primates, hamsters, whatever. So it's a pandemic caused by a bat virus. After millions of transmissions over 2 years, this virus has now become a human virus. It is spread mostly in human beings worldwide, and it infects the infected human beings now can, by reverse zoonosis, infect many animals. And I'll give you the parameters, what makes an animal susceptible to the COVID virus. Now, here again is this schematic drawing. Number one, we had the original zoonosis from a bat through a secondary host into human beings. Then over the year and a half now, we realized that human beings can transmit this virus to many different cats, ferrets, mink, dogs, and other animals. So that is a reverse zoonosis. Now what happens, those animals that get infected can then have a new zoonosis. The mink can then give it back to humans that are not infected. So we have a terrible cycle going on worldwide of infection and then reinfection. The possible animal sources for coronavirus SARS-CoV-2 are shown here in this picture. Not all animals are equally susceptible, but basically it's most of the animal kingdom. And I'll show you what are the parameters that can be infected with this virus from people or bats, and then can transmit it onto other people. Now, before we got the coronavirus that we're dealing with, many virologists have studied this type of virus, the coronavirus, in all different animals, veterinary medicine, human medicine. The common cold, many of the common cold viruses in people are coronaviruses. Birds have probably the first coronavirus ever discovered. Bats have many. Cats have a very interesting one that causes a severe deadly disease in pet cats called feline infectious peritonitis. Dogs have it, rodents, cows, horses, you name it, camels, and even beluga whales in humans most likely have coronaviruses. Now, the key to what we're talking about today is this little diagram. This virus has to have a receptor on the cells of the human being or an animal to get into the cell to cause an infection. And we now know that it's the Ace2 receptor. And I'll describe that. Here you see the virus has the protein on the cell surface of the virus. It locks into like a lock and key situation on the cell surface in the respiratory tree or other cells in the body. And that hole allows the virus to get into the cell and do its replication cycle. Without that fit, animals will not be susceptible. So this is the angiotensin converting enzyme 2, which is on many cell membranes. It's on not only respiratory cells, intestinal, kidney, testes, gallbladder, heart. That's why when people get infected with COVID, they can have varied symptoms from mental problems to major organ problems, because those cells in those organs are susceptible to the virus. Now, Ace2 is not a bad receptor. It normally functions to lower blood pressure in people. Now, going back, we have to go back to the beginning of time to figure out how all this has occurred. The Big Bang, there's been evolution ever since, and whatever that was, it's mind-boggling to think about the time sequence. But there's DNA in all living things. It's found in all animals and plants. It's a double helix of DNA. It carries the genetic instructions for the development, functioning, growth, and reproduction of all living things, people, animals, plants, viruses, bacteria as well. It's the instruction for all cellular components necessary for life. And it's an amazing library that all the proteins and functions of every animal on Earth is directed by the molecule called DNA. Okay, I'm not going to make you a molecular biologist, but a simple version of this to understand how animals get susceptible or can be susceptible. We have the Ace2 gene, which is in people or animals. It's in the chromosome, and it's signified by this area as the gene for that enzyme. It's transcribed into RNA, which is then into messenger RNA, much like the vaccines that we're dealing with for COVID. It's then translated in the cytoplasm into a protein, and it's then stuck onto the outside of cells. Once that happens, that makes those cells in any animal susceptible if it's the same type of receptor exactly as the human receptor. So animals who have DNA closest to humans should be theoretically more susceptible to this virus. And there have been many studies by brilliant scientists figuring out which animals not only have the homologous DNA, but which animals ACE2 receptor is closely related to humans that can predict whether that animal species will be susceptible. So look at this eye-opening chart. Every human being on Earth today is 99.9% homologous or the same as every person on Earth. So a person in New York City, a person in Nairobi, a person in Jakarta have this almost identical genome. The difference is the color of the skin, the color of the eyes, the color of the hair, the height, whatever it may be, that 0.1% accounts for that. We're related to our Neanderthal ancestor by very closely, 99.7% homology with that, our ancestor. Chimps are one of the closest relative, 98.8% homologous. Gorillas, a little less. Pigs are even that closely related to people. 98% of the DNA of pigs is similar and homologous to people. Cats, pretty high, 90%. Mouse, 85, dog, 84, and on down the list. Chickens are only 65. The little fruit fly is still 61% homologous to people. And how about the banana you might have for lunch? 60% of the DNA is homologous to your DNA. The tree outside, 50%. Honeybee and the lowly daffodil still has 25% of DNA, the same as you and I. So back to the origin, bats are the reservoir for many of these viruses. They host most viruses of any type of any animal. Most of the coronavirus sequences in bats, there are almost 4,000 different coronaviruses in bats. The MERS virus, which is a Middle East respiratory syndrome of 10 or 15 years ago, the SARS virus, and now the coronavirus, the COVID-19 pandemic is caused by these viruses coming from bats. The bats, however, have a unique immune system that protects them from disease from these viruses and all the other viruses they seem to cause. Now, the bat can infect with these viruses people and animals. And how? Well, from body fluids. They can bite through saliva. They can through urine, feces, or blood can contaminate a person or an animal. Some are intermediate hosts, the wild animals like monkeys, antelopes, etc., camels, pigs, and maybe even the pangolin. They can then infect people. Or a mosquito or a tick can feed on a bat, pick up the whatever virus it is, and infect people by biting a person. Or the bat can just leave contaminated feces, saliva, urine on surfaces, and people or animals can get infected by contact. So there are many ways that the spread of these viruses can occur. Now, what type of animals are we talking about today? Well, we can classify some as pets, Some is peridomestic animals. What does that mean? Animals that live around your house, my house, and all establishments where people live in the world. There are wild animals that basically live in the wild and try not to be at all close to human beings. And then there are farm animals that we farm. We bring them together. We stack them together in great numbers, which forces the spread of any pathogen, for factory farming and the misuse of animals very closely housed together in unsanitary conditions. Now we're on to pet cats. These, I think, are the most dangerous for people because they live with us. They live in our house. So if they become infected, we are being exposed to these animals on a daily basis through our affections. And I'll show you some interesting pictures that are funny and very heartfelt of how people interact with their animals. Cats can be infected with this virus from people. It's shed and it spreads from cat to cat by aerosol, just like in people. So cats become new reservoirs rather than having to worry about bats? Do we have to worry about cats as new reservoirs? Yes, possibly we do. Dogs are susceptible, but they don't seem to be as susceptible as cats, and they don't shed the virus very well. So it's not likely that dogs will become a new reservoir for the SARS-CoV-2 virus. Ferrets are pets. Yes, they are infected easily. They grow the virus to great amounts. They produce variants. They shed. So very possibly they will become or have become a new reservoir. Hamsters, the same thing. They get infected. They shed the virus. They somewhat possible to have a new reservoir, although most households don't have hamsters as pets, but hamsters do exist. So we're looking at the pet cat, which I've worked with for many years with the feline leukemia virus and now with the Bartonella bacteria that causes cat scratch disease. 90% of cat DNA is the same as ours. So the cats are very susceptible to experimental transmission via aerosol. Just put them in a cage, separate them, and the aerosol can transmit the infection. Worldwide, many pet cats, are naturally infected by their owners. This is reverse zoonosis. Reverse meaning not from animal to human, but from human to animal is the reverse zoonosis. Cat disease caused by this human virus is very mild or not at all in many cats. There's no zoonotic transmission yet, and I think hopefully that'll remain the case, of transmission from cats back to humans. Cats most closely associate with people and may become an additional reservoir. And yes, already there are variants in cats, probably variants from the person infected to the cat, but there may be new variants developed in cats, and they may also generate more dangerous viruses. Now here we see an older woman who might, of course, have more susceptibility to that virus, which might come from a cat someday, hopefully not. Or this adorable picture of certainly transmission aerosol, nose to nose, kissing her lovely beloved pet cat. Now cats can be reservoirs, and if you think about it, probably you know in your own neighborhood there are feral cats, stray cats, living on outdoor scraps from people or hunting and then exposing, let's say, mice, rats, or other small animals to their virus. So you see here the cats can be reservoirs, multiple cats. Many people collect cats. Sometimes we had a person that had 110 cats in a walk-up 5-floor apartment in New York City when we were researching the feline leukemia virus. But kids love cats. Dogs love cats. Mice don't, but cats can infect blood-sucking insects. And there have been sequences of the SARS virus found in some fleas. There have been reports of that. Now, dogs don't have to relax, even though they're less susceptible. Their DNA is 84%. They can get infected. They're not very susceptible, and there's no known aerosol transmission. There are many reports of dogs being infected by reverse zoonosis from their owners infected to the dog. Mild to no clinical diseases in dogs. No zoonosis, dogs back to humans. There are variants already found in dogs, probably the variants that the person had that infected the dog, but hopefully not new variants that are generated by the replication of the virus in the dog. Ferrets are pets, and as you can see here, they're lovely animals, and they are very affectionate, and kids and adults love to have them as pets. They're highly susceptible to the SARS infection. Natural infection occurs in pet cats and even in ferrets that are rabbit hunting ferrets in Spain. Experimental infection, the original human strain, resulted in the generation of mutants, new mutants in ferrets on the spike gene, the protein that attaches the virus to cells. And that is very disconcerting. These mutations increase rapidly, and half of the ferrets infected that with the human strain developed this mutation. This is very troubling and may be a new source for a very more dangerous SARS isolate. And most ferrets that are infected recover, so they can go on for a while transmitting the virus and not die of the disease. Another pet hamster, highly susceptible, infected experimentally, and they can transmit the virus to other hamsters. Most infected hamsters have only mild signs, but there is one hamster, Roborovsky dwarf hamster, which develops acute severe terminal disease. They die from the human virus infection in this hamster. Mink also die, and we'll talk about that in a subsequent slide. So not many animals that are infected with the human strain, SARS-CoV-2, will die from their infection. Some will. Now, very disconcerting reports recently from China. The incidents in China where pets that of COVID infected people were forcibly killed by the local government due to the strict virus prevention measures. So the person had COVID, the government found out, or maybe they were quarantined, came in and removed and killed the cats. Residents in Southwest China claimed that her cat was killed after she moved from her home into a COVID quarantine facility. Another woman from Northeast China said that her 3 cats were killed after testing positive for the virus. And the authorities responded to that saying, if the animal tests positive, then they cannot come back, move back, meaning move back to the owner's facility. China has a zero COVID-19 strategy. When the outbreaks happen, the local governments use massive testing, contact tracing, and quarantine to dampen down the pandemic. Those methods work, and they have worked from day one. The rest of the world is applying those methods very lightly, but trying to control the pandemic mostly by vaccination. Okay, peri-domestic animals, the animals that you see in your yard. You may like to see them, you may not. The feral cats that many people feed, which is a dangerous situation for many pathogens, including rabies and other viruses that can be transmitted from these feral cat colonies back to people. Stray dogs can transmit rabies worldwide, especially in India. Raccoons transmit rabies as well as possibly the SARS virus. Now, the rabbits around your house, the squirrels, chipmunks, opossums, even bats, deer, as you'll see, are very susceptible to the infection. Coyotes, foxes, all these animals which live near our dwellings can be infected with the SARS. Now, interestingly, black bears, most people don't think of black bears as a peri-domestic animal. But believe it or not, New Jersey, where I'm sitting, supposedly has the highest number of black bears in any state of the union. So that is disconcerting. And yes, we've had several reports of black bears 1 or 2 blocks from our house in New Jersey. Susceptibility of the peri-domestic animals. There's a long list of these animals, and I won't bore you by reading every one of them, but the ones you should worry about are the mink, They are infected and they shed, and they then can transmit it back to people. That's the only animal that's done that. Ferrets, same thing. Infected, can shed. Fruit bats, infected and shed. The white-tailed deer, the same thing. They get infected, they shed it to other deer. Raccoons, house mouse, cottontail rabbits, the same thing, on down the list. So as you know, the overpopulation of animals in the suburbs, loss of their habitat, global warming, whatever it may be, deer in the front yard, feral cats in your backyard, multiple cat households next door in your neighbor's house, stray dogs occasionally, wild pigs if you're living in Arkansas in the West, and rats, unfortunately, in the major cities of the country are peri-domestic animals. Now, susceptible are SARS. To SARS are the skunks. And according to one report, the raccoon is not susceptible, but some other report, there's a slight evidence that they may be susceptible to infection with the virus from people. Deer. This is a shocking occurrence because we have deer, sometimes herds of deer in the front yard. And I'm sure you all do too if you live at all in the suburb. They're very susceptible to infection with the original SARS isolate that came right from China, didn't grow in other animals, and stays as using the human Ace2 receptor. There's natural infection. They found 40% of all the white-tailed deer naturally living in the environment in Ohio were infected with this virus. They found that this is even more unsettling. They found the viral RNA of this virus in 2 pregnant deer in the fetuses of those pregnant deer. So there was vertical transmission. There's no evidence for this in human beings, fortunately, that pregnant women transmit the virus in utero, or there's any adverse effects of a pregnant woman infected. The outcome in the child is newborn has not been any problems. We must take biosafety precautions for wild and farm deer. Well, farm deer, they can do that on the farm, but for wild deer that are hunted, so many people hunt deer, dress the deer, and then eat the venison. And there should be a biosecurity alert for deer hunters that white-tailed deer, the most common deer in the United States, very high infection rate. And when they're dressing in the field, removing the viscera, and then starting to dress and remove enough of the carcass for meat consumption, they should use long gloves, long sleeve gloves, your face mask, and eye protection when doing the dressing of the deer. Mice. Their DNA is 85% similar to the human DNA. However, they're clearly resistant to infection with the original isolate, which uses the human Ace2 receptor. However, they're susceptible to infection by a variant with the mutation of the S protein, the surface protein of a variant that apparently came from humans with mutations and variants, which then allows the binding to the mouse Ace2 receptor. So yes, mice are susceptible to the variants, not necessarily to the original isolate. And as we know now, the Delta variant is the majority of the infected virus prototype in human beings in this country and the world today. Mice infected with such a variant may become reservoirs, and this may then be transmitted zoonotically back to people again, and may be more dangerous and more pathogenic and start an even worse pandemic. Rabbits. The New Zealand white rabbit, which is a laboratory rabbit used for producing antibodies, are very susceptible in experimental infections. But surprisingly, and they do shed the virus and able to transmit it to other New Zealand whites in cages without any contact, so by aerosol. The cottontail rabbit, the wild rabbit has not been studied properly yet. The study that was reported was very low dose of virus inoculated. They did not get infected, but the critics of that study say that they didn't give enough virus to see if they truly were infectable. There's no natural human to rabbit transmission reported in nature. Lions, we're looking at wild animals now. These are wonderful animals. The lions, tigers, cougars, snow leopards, gorillas, primates, rhesus monkeys, the mink, the otters, and the New Zealand white rabbits. Even tree shrews and grivets. I don't know what a grivet is, so don't ask. Strike that from your questions. And the pangolin. The beautiful wildcats, the tiger, the lion, the snow leopard. Cheetahs have no reports of any studies done, the leopards either, but the cougars. Lions and tigers are very susceptible to transmission and transmitted by aerosol in zoos. They're obviously been infected by their infected handlers by aerosol, because I don't think many people hug lions or tigers. There's no zoonosis from lions or tigers back to humans reported. Several lions have had life-threatening signs, but did recover. And they may become able to generate new variants and become more dangerous to people. Here's a trip we took in India on the tiger preserve, where they're actually increasing the number of wild tigers very significantly. After hearing about the zoo-infected tigers, the Indian government closed this preserve for tourists. So when we were there, we got these gorgeous pictures of this Bengal tiger, and you can see how close. We were in the vehicle right here, probably 10 feet from this tiger, and the other vehicle was here taking pictures. So there is a chance for somehow a spread of a human virus into the environment for these tigers to be a problem. Snow leopards, they're susceptible to transmission by aerosol and contact. Reports of snow leopards infected from their handlers. 3 snow leopards died from SARS from human beings in the Lincoln Children's Zoo in Nebraska. There's no zoonosis from snow leopards to human. I wonder why. Because they live in the heights of the Himalayas, and not many people trek up there to get close to snow leopards. They may act as a reservoir, but I don't feel they're going to be dangerous in any way for humans. They may be very dangerous for the populations of snow leopards. Cougars, very common in the West and even around here. We've had a few cougar sightings in New Jersey. They're very susceptible and transmitted by aerosol and contact from handlers, of course, in the zoos. No zoonosis from cougars to humans reported. They may be a reservoir, but they also may suffer mortality, and they may be able to generate more dangerous variants. Non-human primates, the chimp, very close related to DNA, and the gorilla. Yes, all these primates are very susceptible to the human SARS virus. The gorilla, 8 gorillas were positive at the San Diego Wildlife Park. They're infected by their asymptomatic handlers as usual. They only had mild respiratory signs and fully recovered. They can transmit it directly, which is a problem, but many people don't get close to gorillas. So if they're handled properly in zoos and wildlife parks, that should be no problem. Otters, group of Asian otters infected in zoos by their handlers, mild respiratory signs and recovered. Beluga whales and dolphins, studies of their receptors say they're very close to the receptors of humans, and they should be susceptible to infection. There have been no infection of beluga whales or dolphins reported, but the fear is that any susceptible animal living in the sea may be infected through contaminated wastewater outflows into the sea. Farm animals, cattle, pigs, horses, mink. Mink are the only ones that are extremely infectable, chickens and ducks. The mink, highly susceptible. Millions of farm mink have been infected by handlers, just without trying, just by handlers infected They infected in Scandinavia, in Central Europe, and even in the United States, outbreaks on mink farms where many minks, hundreds and thousands of minks died of their infection, and millions of minks were euthanized on these farms for the biosafety. There was zoonosis to people on the farms. The only animal that has been so far able to retransmit the human virus back to people that were exposed to them. They also infected feral cats living near the farms in Scandinavia. So somehow the cats got very close to the cage area, became infected. They then went off with this new isolate from minks into the environment. DNA of cows, pigs are very close. Farm animals are relatively resistant to the virus. Pigs are resistant even though they have very close homology with the DNA. Chickens, further down the list for DNA homology, they're not susceptible, they're resistant. Okay, what are the possible variants? What are the problems with them? Well, they may be more easily transmitted, may cause more disease, cause more death. They may cause infection of vaccinated individuals where the virus is not protected as well. They may evade the immunity from people who've recovered from COVID. And there's a risk of different disease, long outcomes like long COVID, et cetera. The dangers are possible recombination. Remember, I told you that all the animals in the animal kingdom have a lot of other coronaviruses. Well, let's think about this virus, the SARS-CoV-2 virus, getting into an animal where it has a coronavirus. It recombines genetically and then comes out as a much worse and more dangerous virus. Well, is there precedence for this? Is it only theory? No, there's not. This happens every year with flu viruses. It's maintained, many flu viruses are maintained in birds, pigs, dogs, and horses. They then come back to infect humans and cause pandemics of new flu every year. So especially pigs, which apparently are like a mixing bowl, if they get infected with the flu virus from any animal, they can mix them up and change the genome, and these viruses can be much more dangerous in the next upcoming flu pandemic in this country. So the message here is get your flu shots now. How do we protect cats and all other animals from the infection with this virus, which is now a human virus, the SARS-CoV-2? Well, you should get your vaccine now. That will protect your animals, your family, yourself, your neighbor, anyone around you, much better than being unvaccinated. If you are sick with COVID and have the virus, stay away from your animals. If you have COVID, quarantine from your animals and wear masks. If you're sick, ask others in the house to feed or walk your dog or cat or ferret, whatever it may be. Keep your animals away from other animals when you're infected, especially cats, which seem to be able to transmit it much more readily. And if your animal becomes sick, seek veterinary help quickly. Do we have a vaccine for animals? I'm getting close to the end, so don't worry. I have a few minutes left. Yes, we do. There is an animal vaccine for SARS-CoV-2. It's produced by the Zoetis company, a very, very large conglomerate at this point in the veterinary field. It's a subunit recombinant vaccine expressing the protein, the spike, which is the best immunogen to protect people and animals from infection. It's mixed with an adjuvant. And that adjuvant not only, it stimulates the body of the animal being vaccinated to recognize the spike protein and make more robust antibody and cellular protection. Many vaccines have this. It's a 2-dose vaccine given 3 weeks apart. Unpublished data by the company says that dogs and cats had a robust neutralizing antibody response. They say the vaccine is safe, and they're already giving it to many large cats and primates in zoos. However, there's always a however. Anything good always has an occasional howevers. Vaccines are now decimating sharks. Yes, sharks. No one comes near sharks with any vaccine or vaccine clinics. How does this affect sharks? Well, again, some pictures I took of a whale shark in Mexico and a silver-tipped shark in the Coral Sea off of Australia. Well, squalene, an oil from shark livers, is a favorite and necessary immune stimulant adjuvant for many vaccines. So people are harvesting sharks for their livers, which is decimating the endangering sharks. You may say, well, that's probably good, but sharks are a basic need for the environment, keeping the environment clean, removing sick animals, etc. And these animals are being, and especially the whale shark, which is somewhat on the endangered list, are being removed from the environment because of the need for vaccines. Now, science does matter. We must get our heads out of the sand to defeat COVID-19. I hope that's not a political statement. It's a real statement about listening to science and following the need to do what we need to do. Well, I hope I kept your attention. I again thank Dr. Durbach for her invitation to present animals in COVID-19 for the World Information Transfer Virtual Voices. And you can see Evelyn Zuckerman, my colleague, and I were on a wildcats field observation study. And this was, after hours with a drink at sundown. But look at these lazy lions. They're not dead from COVID. They're very healthy, but they're just exhausted after a tough day on the savannah. Well, thank you very much, and I'll be happy to entertain questions.
Well, thank you, Dr. Hardy, for a brilliant and extremely important presentation. And now we shall go over to questions so that we can answer as many as we can.
Thank you, Dr. Durbach, and thank you, Dr. Hardy, for a very interesting presentation. Our first question, our student wants to know,
I want to get the whole.
Can veganism help the situation with viruses spreading among animals?
Sure. I don't know of any plants that have been infected with the virus, although it could be there as a fomite, which means it's just on the leaf or the body of a plant that's going to be ingested. But yes, that would be a way to avoid many animal contacts in the food chain, which don't seem to be a real problem because the food is cooked and the handlers in the food chain are the ones that are really having problems. The poultry factory workers, the line workers who prepare the meat that we eat have been decimated with SARS because of the close contact with the meat and the close crowding of the workers in the processing plants.
Thank you. That brings us to our next question. If COVID came from a bat, how could the virus be transmitted if the animal was dead?
If the bat is dead?
Yes.
Not likely, unless an animal is going to feast on that dead body. Apparently, it has to be either through saliva, bodily fluids, urine, feces, or blood transmitted, or the urine and feces can be, deposited on the ground, and any animal then can be infected, as by the one my slide showed, by just contact with the fomite, which is the substance carrying the virus.
Thank you. What are the clinical signs in animals infected with SARS-CoV?
Luckily, most of the clinical signs are relatively mild: sneezing, off of appetite, losing a little bit of weight, not the same, just like in people, mentally not the same. They just don't care about things. They're depressed. Some have severe coughing, and some of the hamsters and some of the mink that died had respiratory distress, just like people. They're unable to breathe and died because of the inability to get enough air. So most often, the animals that I've talked about today, when they show any clinical signs, they're very mild, and that's why sometimes the owners of pets don't realize their animals may be sick from this virus, or don't seek veterinary help very quickly because they feel that, oh, it's a slight sniffles and the animal will be over it. So luckily, it's not as deadly a virus in these pet animals or farm animals, et cetera. as it is in humans.
Thank you. That brings us to our next question, which you may have covered, but our student wants to know, can animals on their own overcome the virus in this pandemic? Or do viruses such as the African plague virus can only be defeated by human science and medicine?
No, the animals do compete and get rid of the virus on their own. Many hundreds or thousands do. Only a few animals die of the virus, as I've mentioned. So the animal's immune system is able to handle it. It's also maybe because the virus is not as well adapted to the animal system as it is now to the humans, after so many billions and billions of replications for the last 2 years in the humans around the world.
Thank you. Our next question is, aside from cats being killed, dogs and cats being killed in China, what restrictions do animals have during the symptoms of the disease? Are there any bans to the walking of dogs?
No, there are no bans that I know of, but it would be wise that people that have dogs in high incidence areas, states where there's an epidemic, a pandemic going on again, which is now occurring in many parts of Europe and in this country in certain states, they should probably not walk their dogs in the parks that have dogs running loose and greeting each other. That would probably be a sensible recommendation. But certainly, if your dog is sick and you and somebody in the household has COVID, do not send those dogs off for boarding while the person recuperates. The animal should be sequestered away from the infected individual in the house. Definitely not given off to boarding kennels, because that could easily be adding to the spread of the virus amongst those animals.
Good to know. Thank you. Our next question is, can any infectious disease affect the mental state of cats?
Oh, yes. Well, some people think the mental stage of cats is off anyway, but they're very independent, but they can be very loving, and also some can be very aggressive. But yes, exactly the same thing with this virus and some bacteria, like the bacteria we work with, Bartonella, can infect by doing the way they affect the brain is that they get into the lining of the capillaries. They cause inflammation. That inflammation can change the functioning of the brain. So you can have animals becoming aggressive, people become aggressive. In our bacteria, Bartonella, we work with, and some people become aggressive because of the inflammation in the brain. And I think the same thing certainly happens with the SARS-CoV-2 virus, because it can infect the lining of blood vessels. So anywhere in the body, there can be inflammation, including the brain. And we know what the functions of brains are in animals and in people, myriad of functions. And some of those can be altered by inflammation with this virus or any other virus in that matter.
Very interesting. Thank you. Our next question is, how can we understand that our domestic cat or dog is sick with COVID? What symptoms do they show us when they get sick?
They don't show many symptoms. They get sniffles, they go off their food. The cats maybe go hide in the closet. They're not feeling just right. It usually occurs only for a few days, and almost all the cats so far, as we know, pet cats, have recovered and not died from the infection in a household. So it's very minimal, and that's a problem because people don't realize a lot of times that their pet is ill, or they might put off going to the veterinarian for a week, and by that time the animal's back to normal, and they say, well, that's good, I didn't have to take the animal to the veterinary hospital.
Thank you. Our next question is, what is the difference between the COVID vaccine for humans and the COVID vaccine for animals?
It's very different. It's totally formulated differently. It's not an mRNA vaccine, although mRNA vaccines would probably work just as well in animals, but it's a recombinant virus vaccine where the gene is put into a plasmid, and then probably, I don't know because it's not been published, probably then expressed on a bacteria. So that bacteria expressing the SARS viral gene is then inoculated. I don't know for sure if that's the case, because I had not seen publications of the proprietary vaccine that Zoetis has developed. But they have approval from the USDA to use in animals, apparently some animals.
Interesting, thank you.
But excuse me, it's not a need yet to go out and use a vaccine like this for all dogs and cats. That is certainly not the case at this time.
That brings us to our next question. How real is the fact that the global pandemic will slow down if people start vaccinating animals?
I don't think that'll make much of a difference at all, because animals are not giving it back, except for mink. Animals are not, the pet animals, the farm animals, the peri-domestic animals are not a major source yet of this virus coming back into people. So it may not be a problem. If we all get vaccinated now, it should not be a problem at all. That this kind of new reservoirs in nature, in other animals, might not be a problem if we're all protected.
Thank you. And regarding vaccines, is there a way to harvest immune stimulants that do not derive from shark, liver, and decimate endangered species? Is there other way to harvest these?
Not to my knowledge, but I'm not a vaccinologist, so I don't know. But I would hope the biochemists we have in the world could figure out a way to make a molecule in the laboratory that would do the same thing as this liver oil from sharks, hopefully before sharks are eliminated. That there are other adjuvants. We've used adjuvants for many years in research that are not from shark livers, and they work very well for what we wanted to do. But it may not work as well on some of these newer vaccines that we're dealing with today. So hopefully there will be a remedy to that use of the squalene, especially in flu virus vaccines.
Thank you. Do any of these species, either due to vaccine manufacturing or development or due to the virus itself, face a threat of extinction?
I would say not. I would say if the snow leopard up in the Himalayas had a very infectious virus that killed them quickly, they would be in tough shape. But luckily, that does not seem to be the case. But most of the animals that we've talked about today, there are many, many animals in the environment. They're not in the ones you have to worry about are the tigers in the preserves around the world, who might, if they get a virus that will kill the tigers, it could eliminate the tigers very quickly, because the numbers are rather low in the world. Probably only a few thousand tigers are still viable worldwide in many countries. Thank
you. Our next question is, I've heard that large animals like the blue whale or rhino do not get cancer, and science cannot explain this yet. Is this true?
I don't know. That's very interesting. There are some animals that don't get cancer that we've known for years. It may be they have a special immune system, because immune systems can clear cancers when they occur. And a lot of therapy nowadays is used by immune drugs. But the blue whale, which is the largest animal ever lived on Earth, I don't know how many have been looked at enough to make sure, autopsies, that they don't develop any cancer. They're so rare to begin with that I would think that probably would be the case. And it depends on animals that they have a short lifespan compared to man or humans. Then they're less likely to develop cancer, because a lot of the time cancer occurs in older animals because of genetic abnormalities in dividing cells as the animal gets older.
Thank you. Our next question is, how can we provide safety from COVID-19 for our homeless animals?
That's a good question. There are a lot of homeless animals in shelters. And what was interesting during the pandemic, the shelters were cleared of all their animals around the country and around the world. People had wanted companionship with animals, and they brought them into their home. Unfortunately, as the pandemic has ebbed a little bit, a lot of the shelters are receiving these animals back, because people have to go to work and can't afford the doggy or cat or whatever care that's needed. Hopefully, if there ever is a need for that epidemic in shelters and cats and dogs, if there was a good vaccine for those animals, that would be a good way to protect them They can't wear masks, they can't social distance. So a vaccine that was very effective in preventing the infection would protect those animals in shelters.
Thank you. How effective is the vaccine in house pets at reducing coronavirus transmission in humans?
No idea, because I don't really know of any vaccinations yet in house pets. I don't think it's been approved by the USDA to be used in pets. And the AVMA, the governing body of veterinary medicine, does not recommend vaccinating pet cats, nor does the US and World Health Organizations at this time. So I think it's off in the future. If it's needed, I'm sure a company will come up with a decent vaccine. They've come up with many vaccines for animals over the years, and that's what's kept animals healthy throughout time, from deadly viruses like and bacteria like anthrax, like rabies, and foot and mouth disease have been eliminated by vaccines in animals.
That brings us to our next question. Where are these coronavirus vaccines in animals currently being used?
Mostly in large animals in zoos and wildlife parks. A bunch of all the wildcats in several zoos, and I think the primates received this Zoetis vaccine, but that's only hearsay from me, and I'm not sure that's accurate. But I know Zoetis company is trying to get the ability to vaccinate all these animals within wildlife parks, and I believe they're doing it at no cost, but I'm not sure of that either.
Fantastic. And you may have covered this, but perhaps you could remind our audience, which animal has the highest risk of developing severe coronavirus disease?
Mink. And the mink, and before this all started with the mink, there was a big movement to remove mink farms and stop the mink farming for coat, for the development of their furs. And that was accelerated in the Scandinavian countries with COVID, with the danger of COVID coming out into the human population. And a lot of these farms were totally decimated. All the animals were removed, euthanized, and not permitted any longer in certain countries. I don't think that's the case yet in the northern part of our country. I think the farm still exists, but I don't know, under much different management and much more biosecurity, biosafety security for those animals and surrounding populations.
Thank you so much. Dr. Durback, I'm going to hand it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jessica. And Dr. Hardy, your presentation was absolutely brilliant, and I do hope that many of our audience have been able to listen to it. And I also would like to turn this over to Susie Hallock, who just came back from Glasgow, to see whether she has any perspectives on your presentation. Susie?
Thank you so much. This was so enlightening and informative. I just came back from Glasgow, as Dr. Durback mentioned, and I'm curious if you think that with all of the efforts to achieve lower carbon emissions, are there any parallels we can draw with the issues that you've described today in terms of transmission of COVID-19 from animals to humans? Are there any impacts or are they completely unrelated?
No, I don't think it's unrelated at all. I think global warming, the destructions of the rainforest in Brazil, is changing the habitats and the life process of how animals get food, how they reproduce, how they live, and it is a major problem for pandemics. Global change, global warming has increased the ability for pathogens to become pandemic in the human population, and even probably in animal populations that we don't even know about, forcing animals together because of loss of habitat, because of human use of fuels that are just too much carbon producers, destroying the environment for the animals, gets them closer together, allows more ability for spread of dangerous pathogens and pandemics, which then can spill over, the term that's been used for years, spill over into humans and cause major pandemics in the future. And I think this will happen unless we get a hold of the global warming situation. And I hope that you had a successful meeting.
It was, and thank you. It makes sense that biodiversity, climate issues, they all go hand in hand, although they're separate issues. Everything is intertwined. So thank you. That was very helpful.
You're welcome.
Hardy, again, we had 6 representatives at Glasgow listening to what has been going on and the negotiations for the climate change. Unfortunately, we have too many governments that are really unwilling to take on their position and work on this. However, hopefully that will change. And presentations like yours, which also point out specifically the effect of the destruction of the habitats and how it exacerbates the transfer of unknown viruses, and also the climate change will affect the human population. So I cannot thank you enough for being here with us, and I hope that we'll be able to invite you again for an update on the situation from your perspective and your science and investigation. So again, thank you, and we are most grateful, and please, we wish you a wonderful day and wonderful continuation of your extraordinary work in this field.
Well, thank you very much. I enjoyed it very much, and the questions were very, very good. Thank you.
Delighted to hear that. Take care. Susie and Jessica, thank you very much for the co-hosting. I appreciate that very much. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
You too. Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you.